This is a paper that he cites, right? Because someone was looking, I guess they were looking for a footnote. I'm like, well, this is not a dissertation. This is not a paper. It's a debate. But he says where he gets it from. It says Hebrew University, Jerusalem, Harvard Medical School, and published November 30th, 2022. He's telling you where he's getting the information.
Yes. Yeah, that's how you. That's how you would cite something in a debate. You give because it's verbal. It's not written now. At least in this debate, you say enough to where the person with basically using those search terms or basic bibliographic resource will be able to find it. So it's not hidden. They know what it is. It's not, it's all right there. That's how you do it. How you don't do footnotes like look at the footnote at the bottom. That is the equivalent of the footnote in a verbal debate like this. That is how you do it. That's pretty standard.
Right. And then he actually gives you the screenshot of the actual paper in which he gets this information from. So he's
that's sort of going. That's like a going above and beyond, really. In a way.
He goes on, right in the 33-minute mark. He says, great contributor to the slaves that were brought over to the United States of America in the Caribbean, which would explain why we say Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, right? According to tradition and genetics, are the tribes that are the so-called black tribes, the ones that were brought over from here, from West Africa, right? So there's traditions and genetics, things that he says we don't have that substantiate that, right? So he's using tradition and genetics to prove that these guys are from Israel. But then a few minutes later, he says, funny that there's been so much talk about I know he was going to do this right now. I don't subscribe to the idea that there's DNA that can actually trace anybody back anywhere in antiquity. I don't subscribe to that whatsoever, but he does. But there's a problem with that. But you just use genetics to prove. Then just minutes later says, well, I don't subscribe to that. I'm like, you're contradicting yourself. Right? I mean, so, then we got to do some fact checking.
My guess is he would say, I don't, but Dr. Brown does. So even people who he says would agree with him don't agree with him. But obviously, it is trying to have it both ways, obviously.
Right.
But I'm sure, I imagine that would be the justification there. But yeah.
Right. Do you want to share anything?
Yeah. Are you going to play a clip from the debate? Are you going to do that?
Well, yours, when I'm done with this right here, I'll definitely get to your thing.
Okay.
Yeah, but I got yours already set up. So, we got to do some fact checking with Dr. Brown too, right? So he's talking about the genetic, linkage of the Ashkenazi Levites to Israel. Is that true? What he's saying? Like he quoted, some academia. Like, well, is that true? Right? So we got to look at what he says as well. And according to this particular paper, it says approximately 300,000 men around the globe self-identify as Ashkenazi Levites, of whom two-thirds were previously shown to descend from a single male. The paucity of the whole Y chromosome sequences precluded conclusive identification of this ancestor's age, geographic origin, and migration patterns. Here, we report the variation of 486 Y chromosomes within the Ashkenazi and non-Ashkenazi Levite R1A clade or clave of other Ashkenazi Jewish paternal lineages, as well as non-Levite Jewish and non-Jewish R1A samples. Cumulatively, the emerging profile is of a Middle Eastern ancestor, self-affiliating as Levite, and carrying the highly resolved R1A Y2619 lineage, which was likely a minor haplogroup among the Hebrews. A star like the phylogeny, coalescing similarly to other Ashkenazi paternal lineages, 1743 YBP, suggests it to be one of the Ashkenazi paternal founders, to have expanded as part of the overall Ashkenazi demographic expansion without special relation to the Levite affiliation. and to have subsequently spread to non-Ashkenazi Levites. With regard to the deep origins of R1A-Y2619 Ashkenazi Levites, the paper concludes that, quote, the proposed Middle Eastern origin of the Ashkenazi Levite lineage, based on what was previously a relatively limited number of reported samples, can now be considered firmly validated. The R1A-Y2619 lineage, quote, was likely a minor haplogroup among the Hebrews. So I'm not a geneticist. That's not my thing. I'm not into biology. That's what we call in DNU special teams, right? But this is affirming what Dr. Brown was saying when it came to the genetic lineage of the Ashkenazi, at least when it comes to the Levites. Thoughts, opinions?
Yeah, when it comes to the Levites, they've done a lot there, and what I'll hear a lot of Hebrew Israelites be like, well, do we have the body of Aaron to be able to? And it's like, these guys will look at a piece of cardboard with some marker on it, and someone will say, hey, you're Haitian, you descend from Aaron, and they accept that. Mm-hmm. But all of a sudden, when geneticists are taking common, noticeable, distinctive genetic traits from people who self-identify or have names that indicate they may be Kohen or descended from them, and they notice some distinctives, that's nothing. That's not good enough. Got to have the body of Aaron. But a piece of cardboard and invented sometime in the 70s and copied now on your local city block, that's good enough. Mm-hmm. It's just like, guys, come on. You gotta, if we're gonna equal weights and measures, that's all I'm saying.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, there's been talk about DNA. Oh, there's been talk about DNA. And it's funny that there's been so much talk about I knew he was going to do this, right? So now I don't subscribe to the idea that there's DNA that can actually trace anybody back anywhere in antiquity. I don't subscribe to that whatsoever, but he does. There's a problem with that. So the problem with DNA, according to sequencing.com, which is a leading DNA research company, Jewishness is more difficult to identify in genetic testing than other ethnic groups. This is because there is no specific gene that makes a person Jewish. Also, straightforward DNA examination cannot conclusively tell a person whether or not they are Jewish descent or a part of a Jewish population. So what's interesting is one of his objections to the 12 tribe chart was, well, you cannot demonstrate a genetic connection between these people, but it is impossible for anybody to actually demonstrate a genetic connection between any modern people and the ancient Israelites. That cannot be done. So he's asking me to do something that is not only impossible, but something that his people cannot do either, right? Moving on. Another problem with DNA. According to Raphael Falk, an Ashkenazi Jew.
Okay, so I just wanted to bring this up. This is piggybacking on what you were referring to earlier, BK, in terms of sources and contradictions. Let's just stay there. Can you go to the next slide? I just want to, this is something that unfortunately, we say this a lot, but I think we say it because it's true. There's just this proclivity to, and we see this a lot, this proclivity to not continue reading. Keep reading. Okay. And so I just went to his own source. This is his own source that he read from. If you can go to the portion, BK. So in his 2 slides, this is what he said. Jewishness is more difficult to identify in genetic testing than other ethnic groups. This is because there's no specific gene that makes a person Jewish. That was his first bullet. The second bullet was this: straightforward DNA examination cannot, and he stressed that, cannot conclusively tell a person whether or not they're of Jewish descent or part of the Jewish population. That is the second bullet point. That's where he ended, okay? But he needed to keep on reading. The next sentence starts with, however, a DNA test kit can give you this information in other logical and accurate ways, okay? So let me just pause here before I move on. Let me just say this very quickly. When you're talking about genes and DNA examination, what you are referring to is nuclear DNA. You're talking about the DNA that is in the nucleus of the cell, okay? And very quickly, what is a gene? A gene is a segment of DNA that codes for a specific protein, okay? So we have DNA that have what's called nucleobases, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, okay? Depending on the sequences of those four, what we call nucleobases, those code for a specific protein. Again, nuclear DNA, okay? Let me move on. Judaism is passed on through the maternal line. If your mother, and again, let me just be clear, I'm reading this because this is his source, okay? Judaism is passed on through the maternal line. If your mother is Jewish, then you're Jewish, even if you don't practice the religion. DNA test kits can show you who you're related to via your relatives and female ancestors, so you can see whether or not you are Jewish. Can you go to the next one, please? This may sound like it involved a lot of guesswork, but that's where a DNA test to prove Jewishness comes in. Remember what he said in the clip, or just those 2 points he mentioned? This happens with the examination of mitochondrial DNA, okay? This DNA is exclusively passed down through women in a family, so following it can prove Jewish ancestry, okay? So what is mitochondrial DNA? Mitochondria, there's organelles in our cells called mitochondria. Mitochondria have their own DNA. It is separate from nuclear DNA. So whereas nuclear DNA has, thousands, codes for thousands and thousands of genes, mitochondrial DNA has much less. I believe it codes for 37 genes. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but it codes for a significantly less amount of genes. And so while it is true that nuclear DNA, this source is saying that it is true that nuclear DNA can't and does not indicate Jewishness, mitochondrial DNA can indicate Jewishness, okay? He simply, two things. He failed to recognize that DNA exists in the mitochondria, okay? And number two, and most importantly, he failed to keep on reading. Because if he would have kept on reading, he would have seen that his own source contradicted him. That's it. That's all I have to say.
All right. So you don't want to read.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. Note, however, that this method generally works best for Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry folks, since nearly 40% of Ashkenazi Jews descend from the same four women. Tracing mitochondrial DNA back to one of them will prove Jewish ancestry. Again, let me just be clear. This is his source. Okay. There are still the 60% of Ashkenazi Jews that did not descend from them, but many people will be able to easily trace their Jewish ancestry back to these matriarchs. You can also determine if you are most likely descended from Ashkenazi Jews if your family history shows more Eastern Europe traces.
Cool. Thank you so much. So yeah. So
Oh.
Keep reading.